What the Speak, episode 16. Like, oh my God, I think I'm gonna be sick from that presentation.
Do you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch? If not, these expert discussions and insider tips can help you right now, today. Welcome to the What the Speak podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly.
Struggling with feeling comfortable in front of an audience when you present? Or maybe you're confident, but you have difficulty stumbling over filler words like and ah. Well, you can start kicking ass today by signing up for our weekly VIP updates. As a bonus, you'll also receive 11 free tips that will uncover 6 psychological secrets to public speaking, plus 5 tips on how to stop using filler words. Go to whatthespeak.com/VIP. My guest today, Paul B. Evans, is one of the most down-to-earth speakers that you'll ever meet. He's also somebody that will make sure that your audiences do not fall asleep. He wrote a resource called Engage, How to Avoid Becoming a Human Tranquilizer, and we talk about some of the insights in that resource during our discussion. Paul first stepped on the stage in the 6th grade and was being paid to speak by age 16. His experience includes over 30 years and more than 1,500 presentations. So, Paul B. Evans, it is so good to have you on the show. Thanks for showing up today. I appreciate it.
Man, I'm glad to be here.
So, I've heard from others through the grapevine that you're like a Jedi master when it comes to stage presence and delivery, and I had to talk to you about this.
I appreciate that. Well, if you've talked to anybody, they've told you a couple of things. Number one, I'm not a professional speaker. I'm an unprofessional speaker, and I'm a conversational speaker. I think the best introduction I ever got was a guy that got up and said, hey, before Paul comes and has a conversation with us. So I like that format and that frame because I really believe that everybody can be a speaker. I think we're making it too hard because we've been talking all our life. We're just a little bit afraid when we get in front of people because we think that everything's on the line. But if we'd relax a little bit, it'd go a lot better.
Awesome. Well, let's dig into it then. I would love to talk with you about this idea. I know you've talked a lot about really how to avoid being a boring speaker and really ultimately tapping into what we already all naturally have, the ways that we can fascinate an audience.
Yeah.
So, to get started, I'm thinking it would be good to talk about when we get on stage, how do we instantly connect with an audience? What's your tip? What's your recommendation?
Yeah, I definitely believe in engagement and starting out right out of the gate and connecting with people. And often we say things like, well, let's tell a joke or let's tell a story that gets the crowd activated. And I believe all those are pretty helpful. But what I've found is the most helpful is to use something that I call common ground. That we all have very similar backgrounds in a lot of ways, and that we have parents, even though some of us may have had what we consider good parents and others bad parents. We've had grandparents that are often very active in our life, and we've had situations that are very universal. A lot of people had a pet growing up, and all this sounds like it's very small and doesn't really matter because we want to get on stage and impress a lot of times. But the truth is, if we can find some common ground, if we can tell a story about something that happened to us in childhood or a time when we messed up, not that we become the champion or the knight, but we've messed up and we've had an issue or a problem. And one of the stories that I start out with a lot of the time is when I got trapped under some weight at the health club when I was working out a lot, and turns out that the punchline is that I get rescued by a lady. And the crowd is laughing and I'm looking pitiful and all that, but we've all felt trapped, right? We've all felt weighted down and we've all needed somebody to pull the weight off of us. See, that's common ground. It's a story that may have happened to me, but people can associate it to themselves and feel like not that I listened to that guy's story, I listened to that girl's story, but I just heard my story. Mm-hmm. That was my story. And when we can start out in common ground and people feel like we know them or we've lived a similar life to them, then it's instant rapport. The old sales adage is that people do business with people they know, like, and trust. Well, as communicators, we really need to foster that right off the bat. And the best way, to me, is by finding common ground. And that's often by taking people to their backyard. There's a couple of options. You can either take people to the moon, or you can take people to their own backyard. And when you take them to their own backyard, there's familiarity, there's comfort, there's an experience of lightness, and people tend to connect with that. And right out of the gate, if we can do that, then we'll build that rapport, and people will trust us for the rest of our talk.
Yeah, I mean, I love the concept behind this, and really that it's going from a place of, you know, me as the speaker, I'm above everybody else.
Right, right.
I'm the expert. I know what I'm talking about. You're going to get information from me, and flipping that around to where it's like, I'm somebody that is approachable. I'm somebody that you can relate to. Heck, you can probably even see yourself in my shoes because we've established this common ground, as you said.
Yeah.
So I think that's really powerful. Now, the one thing I'd ask you is, as a follow-up to that, is let's say, you know, I want to go and I want to use this next week. I'm going to give a presentation. How can I segue from establishing that common ground and maybe telling a story and connecting that into setting up what it is that I'm going to be presenting? Any ideas or techniques on that?
Yeah, I definitely believe that whatever story we're telling, that we've got to make sure that it's highly integrated into the overall theme or the purpose of the talk. So even if I tell that story about Trisha rescuing me, well, that has to do with the talk itself. Maybe I'm talking about, in fact, just name a topic. Doesn't matter what the topic is.
Let's say flying a balloon.
All right, flying a balloon. All right, so let's say that I talk about Trisha, and I was trapped on this weight. Hands appeared, ripped it off of me. Her name was Trisha. Hey, we all know what it's like to feel weight on us, right? We all know what it's like to feel pressure. Well, the exact opposite is what we're going to do when our life becomes like flying a balloon. It becomes lighter. It becomes airier, and the heaviness seems to cease. So I've taken a story that is a little bit hard to segue because of the difference, but the juxtaposition there allows me to go from heaviness to lightness. And so when I'm thinking about whatever story I'm telling, how am I going to integrate that in and segue it in? There needs to be that association. What I think we don't need to do as speakers is to tell a story, and let's say that it's funny and everybody laughs, and then we go, okay, well, let me get into my subject tonight. Because basically we've just said, I just told that story to warm y'all up, or I told that story because I wanted to. We've got to make sure that the segue is there, and the way that I like to do that is to use like language. So if I'm talking about the balloon, the like language goes from heaviness to lightness. I'm still in the same associative. If I'm talking about productivity, I'm going to take the weight off of us today of getting more done in less time. So I'm taking the weight off. So I'm using the same language, and it's not creating a dissonance. It's not creating separation from my story into the topic itself. But I'm not going to cut it and say now what I'm talking about today. I don't like saying things like that. I don't even like saying, hey, I'm going to tell you a story. I don't like any setup language. I like to just tell the story. I like to just enter the topic. Chances are they see what the program says anyway, so I'm not surprising them with the topic, so there's no reason for me to really mention it other than use the associative language that allows me to segue naturally.
Nice. See, these are these Jedi mind tricks we talked about earlier.
Jedi.
Great. Well, Paul, the next thing I wanted to dive into with you is, what are 5 things that we can do, that we can say when we feel like, you know what, we're losing the crowd. Their eyes are glazing over. They're not really getting much out of what we're talking about for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Can you just quickly go through some of these 5 high-level things that we should be thinking about?
Okay, so if we're trying to save our talk and we feel like, this really isn't connecting, and if you've seen my video about how to avoid becoming a human tranquilizer, the 5 that I'm about to mention may not be the 5 on there, so you've got to watch both. My favorite that I say is when I feel like I'm losing the crowd, I love to say, I'm going to tell you something right now that you might not believe. In fact, you probably won't. And crowds wake up because they're like, well, why is he saying something I'm not going to agree with? What's he talking? I am going to believe it. Don't tell me what I'm not going to believe. It just creates that personal conversation in their minds, and they have to stop and say, well, what in the world is he going to say that we're not going to believe? Now, the caveat there is, you better say something pretty unbelievable, because you can't just say that to get their attention and then go, I'm just trying to get your attention. We can also say, hey, let's stop right now. We're going to back up. We're going to take another run at this. You know, it seems like I'm not really connecting on this point, and I don't mind admitting things like that. A lot of speakers don't want to admit that the audience isn't really connecting. I just call it like it is. I'll go, you know what? I'm getting some blank stares out there. So let's back this up. We're going to take a run at it again. So that'd be the second style of saying that I might use. I've used this several times, and I've not seen other speakers do it because they think that it's pretty unprofessional and amateurish. And I will often stop and say, what's the last thing I said that made any sense? And so they, you know, the crowd's like, what in the world? And they usually start laughing because they're like, well, what is going on? Why would a speaker say, what's the last thing I said that made any sense? Now, this is also a great phrase to use if you're a tangent or a rambler person or ADD like me, and you get way out there and you're kind of like, uh-oh, I've forgotten even where I am. Mm-hmm. What's the last thing that I said that makes sense? And the key is, by this time, if you've looked out in the audience and you've seen your note takers, then I look at a note taker and I point to him or her. I'll say, hey, note taker, what's the last thing I said that made any sense? And they'll tell me, and we'll be right back on track. And what's funny about that is the audience is laughing. I've really made a damaging omission that I'm really not clued in this moment. But again, it's kind of common ground. Don't we all forget where we were? Don't we all forget what we were saying? Things along those lines. Okay, so that's 3. I don't even know if I'm going to remember 5 in this time, Brian. See, we're flying, got no notes. So I'll also say this is similar to let's stop and back it up. But I'll say we're going to pull the train into the station again. We're going to pull the train into the station again. And what we're doing is using a visual that they're able to see that breaks the pattern of what we're talking about. So if we say I'm gonna put this, I'm gonna pull this train into the station again. People see the train, see it pulling in, and they know it's coming to the stop. You know, we're gonna blow the whistle. We're gonna take another run at this, like I said before, things along those lines. And then I guess the final one that is just not even sexy at all. Sometimes I'll just say, hey guys, it looks like we're not connecting. I'm gonna try to put this in some other language. And in fact, I'm going to do this by telling you something that happened to me about 5 years ago. And so I might launch into a story that hits me in the moment, may not be planned, but I can tell that they're really not with me. Now, what I would highly guard against is that when the audience is not with you, it's fine to say, I don't see you there, but you can't ever act like, let me dumb this down. I can tell that you guys aren't really catching what I'm talking about. You know, if we start to elevate ourselves and act like the audience is stupid and that they checked out because they're not able to get our profound statements, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So usually I blame myself and I'll say, I don't think I'm being clear enough. Let's take another run at this. Or, hey, I'm going to say something you may not believe. In fact, you probably won't. But usually I have something ready with that statement to make sure that it's going to connect.
Awesome. I think that the brilliance in this approach that you're talking about and the different little nuances on how you can really re-engage the audience is something that, you said it, a lot of people will say, oh, this is unprofessional, but really we're not glossing over the fact that, okay, well, the audience isn't really tuned into or I'm not tuned into what the audience needs. Let's just kind of, keep moving along. It's like, let's stop. Let's reassess. Let's make, reconnect there. And I think that's powerful.
Well, we're having a conversation.
Yep.
We're having a conversation with the audience. So I'm watching the audience and I'm trying to figure out, are they listening? Are they paying attention? Are they connected? And are they really in tune? Because what I'm trying to do, and if you say a Jedi mind trick, what I'm really trying to do is predict every outcome. I'm not telling a funny story because it's funny. I'm telling the funny story because I can predict that this is going to be the audience reaction. If I tell a sad story about my first wife passing away in my arms and our son being 5 weeks old at the time, I have to know what level to tell that story with this particular audience to make sure that I don't go too far. You know, the old saying, everybody wants to see a wreck, nobody wants to see the blood. Yeah. So I've got to be real careful with all that. So as we're having this conversation, I'm paying attention to the audience to see where they are. We've all seen the speaker who's going on and on and on, and you're looking at the audience going, he should have quit 10 minutes ago. But he's totally unaware that it's really two-way communication. even though we're the one in control of the words in this moment, we're not the ones in control of the atmosphere, the environment, the emotion within the crowd. And if we're ignoring the emotion of the crowd, if we're not feeling the crowd, we're not going to be able to communicate effectively, and we're certainly not going to be able to re-engage them.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that's interesting too is some of the approaches that you ran through that list on touches upon something that a professor at Carnegie Mellon by the name of George Lowenstein kind of identified, and it's called the information gap theory. And it's, letting people, like drawing them in and kind of getting them to take note and creating this gap between what they know and what they want to know.
Right.
Which I think is powerful, because then it really gets them paying attention very closely to what you're about to say next.
Absolutely.
So, all right, Paul, well, we've got just a few minutes left, and I wanted to touch base on 3 secrets of personal influence and impact. Can you talk about these 3? We've got authenticity, authority, right, and being an advocate.
Yeah, authenticity is just basic, and that is being real, being who we are. That I honestly believe as communicators that if you were to meet me in person, that I'm acting exactly like I'm acting right now. That my voice is the same, my vocabulary is the same, my style, my gestures, all of this, my hyperactivity. Now, there's going to be different levels. And it's funny, I teach a class every Sunday at church, and I usually announce what level I am so they can be ready. So some days I'll go in and say, hey, guys, I want you to know it's going to be a pretty easy day. I'm about 6.5 or 7. And then some days I'll go in and say, guys, I'm an 8.5 or 9. I'm not even sure that we're going to have any fun today because I'm going to be so hyper that y'all may want to be dismissed right now. So that type of authenticity of being real is important, because people want to know not simply that we live these ethical lives. People want to know that we're just real, that we're real people with real issues, real problems, that the things that we're talking about, that we actually live those things in our own lives, that I'm not simply giving a list to speakers to communicate better, and then they come and hear me and they're like, well, Paul doesn't even follow his own stuff. So authenticity. Secondly is authority. A lot of times today we think about authority, and there's authority bling, and people have like CNN and whoever on their website, which I think is cool, but people often start thinking I've got to have credentials. Right. And if I don't have enough background or enough credentials, then I don't have a right to communicate about this topic. I don't think about authority simply being about credentials. I think about it being your confidence, your belief in your right to communicate about this topic. So when it comes to public speaking, I'm not the best speaker in the world, but I started speaking at age 12. I was paid by the time I was 16. So I feel like I've got some authority in this subject. I've studied it. I've practiced it. I live it. It's probably my favorite topic on the planet. So as an authority figure in this, to me, I'm saying I'm coming and I'm going to communicate with confidence about this. I'm not simply going to stand up and share some points. I'm going to speak about these things that I really believe in. I'm not trying to take up time. I'm trying to share knowledge or insight or training or equipping that is going to help people go out and live whatever this is that I'm communicating. And then finally, being an advocate. It's a little bit different in the area of communication, but when it comes to really any niche or any market overall, the key is that a lot of people are beat down. A lot of people need that champion and need that knight that stands up for them. So I might say things along the lines of being an advocate for communicators. I'll say things like, you've got a right to say what you need to say. You've got a right to communicate. You've got a right to get up in public, and maybe even a responsibility, because what you've learned, what you've experienced, your education, things that have been part of your life need to be communicated to the world as a whole, because there are a lot of people who are going down the exact same road and are going to make mistakes, are going to have foul-ups, and are going to need rescue, and you may be the one to do that. So that's kind of being an advocate. Or let's say that somebody comes out with a product that says, you know what, if you're scared of public speaking, I've got the solution, and it's like $1,000 product, and I'll look at it and I don't believe in it. I don't think it's any good. So as an advocate, I go to my people and say, listen, there's a lot of hype right now. There's a big product launch about this. And guys, I've got to tell you, And while I think that there are some good nuggets in this, I'm not going to recommend it at this time because I think that you could do a lot better by getting X, Y, and Z book. See, that's being an advocate for people, standing up, standing in that gap that you mentioned earlier. You're standing in the gap for people and saying, I'm willing to take the heat. I'm willing to take the brunt. I'm even willing to spend money so that you don't have to, so that you end up being bettered by being in my circle, that I'm not going to bring anything to you that's going to make you worse off and make me better off. I want us all to be better off together. That, to me, is what being an advocate really is.
Perfect. Well, Paul, I thank you so much for your time and giving us some insights into how we can avoid becoming human tranquilizers while we're speaking. Very practical information, so thanks again.
Cool. Thanks so much, Brian. Enjoyed being here.
All righty. Are you working out right now or listening to this episode while driving? If so, I know you're not able to leave a rating and review in iTunes at the moment. However, next time you're in front of your computer or smartphone, could you be sure to do so? Just go to whatthespeak.com/audio or whatthespeak.com/video. Thanks so much for your support.
All right, here we go with the outro.
Thanks so much for joining us today on What to Speak. Be sure to visit whatthespeak.com for show notes on every episode and to sign up for our email list to stay updated on resources that'll help you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch.